Hello and welcome to our narrative story and a few things to ponder within that story for March the 19th, 2023. Our narrative lectionary takes us now into Matthew 25. Jesus said, "The kingdom of heaven will be like this. 10 bridesmaids took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. When the foolish took their lamps, they took no extra oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil along with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, all of them became drowsy and slept. At midnight there was a shout, 'Look, here comes the bridegroom, come and meet him.' Then all those bridesmaids got up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the wise, 'Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out.' But the wise replied, 'No, there won't be enough for both you and us. You'd better go back into town to the dealers and buy some for yourselves.' And while they went to buy it, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went with him into the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later the other bridesmaids came also, saying, 'Lord, Lord, open up to us.' But he replied, 'Truly I tell you, I do not know you.' Jesus said, 'Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour.'" God's story, our story. Well, once again, as we have these parables from Matthew, we're so used to the parables from Luke, where they're told in such a way that is much more wide open and much more timeless. So easy in the parables for Luke to really kind of find a place for yourself. But Matthew really approaches this whole genre quite differently, and in many ways they're not necessarily parables at all, but Matthew, like last week when we were dealing with the wedding banquet and the whole thing of dealing with the destruction of Jerusalem and the terror, the crisis of that, and how Matthew works that into the story. But that's not necessarily something you can take from that period of time and then make it our own. It's something that's really specific. And once again, we have a story here that is maybe more of an analogy. This is this and that is that, than it is a parable. And Matthew, I think, is dealing with a very, very specific crisis that his community was facing. You would read the parable on the surface of it, and you would find all kinds of problems with it. These young women, 10 young women, are invited to a grand marriage celebration, and in Jesus' time, these celebrations were huge. The whole village became involved in what was going on, totally interactive. The village would gather together and they would head to the home of the groom. And then with a lot of noise and the banging of tambourines and singing and shouting, they would escort him back to the home of his bride, where the feast then would begin. At the bride's home, the bridesmaids would process with the groom, and then as they're bringing them in, the whole thing would get started. The purpose, and there's a little bit of, once again, translation issue here, because it talks about the bridesmaids have their lamps. Well, it's a little bit different in actually the way that they're talking about it, because we would think of a lamp and we think of the little clay lamps that they have, but this is the word lampada, and it actually means more like a torch or a lantern. It was the purpose of these bridesmaids to be part of the festival procession, and then for them to light the way for the groom as he's coming the last couple of blocks into the bride's home. So really is an important part that they're going to be playing. Within the story, 5 are called foolish and 5 are called wise, but one of the problems that you run into is if you read the story carefully, they all would have been okay if the bridegroom had not been delayed. It's not that the 5 ones who were called foolish were chintzy or that they brought too little oil. They brought enough oil for their lamps, for their torches, if things had gone according to plan. It's not that they fell asleep. That's not what made them foolish, because they all fell asleep. the ones that are called wise because they were ready for the unexpected. They were ready for a contingency. And really, it's kind of within that you start to gain a little bit of an insight as to what the point that Matthew is trying to make. Because it's often the case within the Bible and within the New Testament that they will be really, there's this expectation. And Jesus even said it 3 or 4 times that Jesus would be coming back very quickly, very soon, after the crucifixion and the resurrection and appearing to his disciples. There was this feeling that it would happen within the course of days, maybe even years at the most. But by the time you hit the period of Matthew and the writing of some of these other Gospels, and you'll see it even in St. Paul's writings, where when he's writing his first letters to the Thessalonians in the year 50 to 60, there's really that heightened expectation. Jesus is going to be coming right away, so be ready. But then as the years go on, they begin to realize, well, maybe it's not going to happen like we thought. And so something is going on. And there you have this image of the delayed bridegroom. And there's the message, really, that Matthew is trying to put forward to the people who are listening to this story. There are those who simply were ready for an immediate return and really hadn't kind of thought too far beyond that. But then maybe there are those who are saying, it could be longer. It could take longer. So maybe we better kind of prepare ourselves and become more of a people for the long haul, people who are willing to kind of hunker down a bit and to push our way through this delay. And of course, ultimately, if you were thinking about it that way, we would still be waiting almost 2,000 years later. The 5 that were wise, designated as wise, had extra with them. And in a moment within the story that seems kind of mean, the 5 who are running out say, give us some of yours. But the other 5 say, we can't do that. Because if we give you some of ours too, then we all may run out. And then the whole thing just gets messed up. So if you look at that and realize that Matthew is talking to those people, people who, really are just on the edge and ready, and dealing with some kind of crises too, because, can we really believe what Jesus said when he's not coming back, and he told us that he would? So there's that tension within the body. Jesus says within this story, keep awake. Be prepared for the unexpected. And that's where the wise ones were different. It may not go as planned. Things may, and that's a wise thing, to be able to kind of look ahead and say, I'm not just going to expect that things will just go boom, 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 but instead I'm going to think about all the different possibilities, and maybe I'll have some stuff in reserve just in case. And that's where Matthew comes into this story, and you realize that he's not just talking about a wedding. This is an insider's story where Matthew is really asking people, how deep is your well? This isn't, will I do enough to earn my way, but am I ready for the contingencies and for the unexpected things that life will throw at me? Read the scriptures. Read the scriptures and let them work deeply in you. And that helps to fill your well. God speaking to you through those, and you connecting to God through the stories and the realities of the scriptures. Listen to the promises that are made, that I will never let you go, says God, that I will love you to the end, that love is stronger than death, that I am with you always. Words like, have no fear, little flock. And it builds up resources within yourself so that when things don't go as planned, and they never do, that you'll have something to fall back on. And the reality, too, that there are some people who just kind of seem to go through life expecting others to always kind of bail them out. And I think Matthew is kind of saying, you got to change your ways on that. That you can't just always live life like that. You can't be, I forget which movie it was, where she's always saying, I'll think about that tomorrow. You can't do that, but you can't always just depend, same movie, on the kindness of strangers. You have to have your own stuff put together as well. Think about possibilities and contingencies. I remember when Carl was just a little kid, and he would be kind of goofing around or being kind of wild or crazy, and all of a sudden, boom, he'd knock a glass off the counter and it would fall and break, and he would say, it was just an accident, and eventually you're going to reach the point where you look at Carl and you'd say, that's why they are called accidents. But at the same time, you can be aware that you're kind of setting things up so that it might happen. It's that being aware that is being called for at this point. Being aware that life is going to be throwing surprises at you. And just a word of wisdom from Matthew that says, you know what? When you have the opportunity, when you have the time, fill your spiritual well and know that you'll have to call upon that someday. So be ready, be awake, be prepared. Not a bad little message for each one of us. Amen? Amen.
touch and